So about almost 70% are doing well. About a third are still suffering. They either had chronic PTSD, so they had it in both follow-ups, or they had delayed onset PTSD. And I gave this talk at the University of Maryland, and one of the faculty members in the audience came up to me afterwards. He does sociology of the military. And he told me, he said, I really hope you keep following them forever. He said, because the military is dealing with people who are reporting to veterans hospitals now in their 80s, reporting PTSD for the first time from World War II. And he said, sometimes it's when their wife dies or their child dies or something starts it, and the feelings that they've had all their lives bottled up come out. And so he said, you know, he would not be surprised if we found people who would exhibit problems maybe after their children leave home, that they've held it together while their children were young, so that it could happen to you even later in your life, that this would happen. In terms of depression, 70% are doing well, and about 30% still are showing symptoms of depression. Basically, I think I'll speed up to get to some more interesting parts. But basically, the amount of damage and traumas that you had during the hurricane is very much, there's a dose-response relationship, that it does, the declines in your physical and mental health follow how much of the trauma that you've had. And PTSD, as you might imagine, is more related to problems during the hurricane than depression is. So that PTSD is very much tied to the impact of the hurricane, whereas depression may be because of things that have happened to you since the hurricane. One of the other things that we've looked at is this issue of post-traumatic growth. This has been found in other studies of disasters, that people cope with the experience actually by feeling grateful. I kind of sometimes am not a very nice person, and I think to myself, if something like this happened to me, I would be very mad at the world, I'd be mad at God, I would just be very angry. And in fact, most people are not like that. I don't know if I would be like that if it happened to me, but most people are not. And a lot of people actually look for the good that came out of the experience, and if they've survived it and they've recovered, they talk about how, you know, being through adversity has made them a better person. That most, actually, people in our study found that they became more spiritual, they became more religious after the hurricane because they were thanking God for having kept them alive and for keeping their loved ones alive. And that's just, we've just started to analyze this, but this is the whole score, with 0 being a low post-traumatic growth score and 80 being a high one. And we definitely have a lot of people who are experiencing growth in themselves as a result of the hurricane. So the other question is, where did all these people go and what happened to them? And why do they return to New Orleans if they do? This is a quote from a woman describing being put on the bus outside of the convention center, and she said, a lot of these people, they didn't have anything. They had no means of transportation, so they couldn't move. They couldn't go anywhere but where they sent them, and they sent them there. I mean, it was sort of like the people getting put on the train going with the Holocaust, not knowing where they're going, just noting they're headed for trouble when they got there. It was a disaster. And this woman talks about how she's leaving New Orleans for the first time. And New Orleans actually had people who, unlike most Americans, people who grew up in New Orleans don't move around a lot. And so many people, in fact, many of the people we interviewed had never been outside of the city until the hurricane. And so people talked about how it was very shocking for them to go to any place else where they were going, and how hard it was to leave the city. So when we interviewed people in 2006, people were, about 50% were in the New Orleans SMSA, and the rest were in other places. By 2010, 13% of our sample were back in their pre-Katrina houses. Most people were not. 35% were in the city, 60% were in the greater New Orleans area, but they were in a lot of different places. So This is where we found them in 2006. That's New Orleans down there. A lot were in Texas, a lot were in Atlanta, Baton Rouge. So people ended up, but we found one person in Alaska, some in California. We found people in lots of different places. This is the FEMA data. So this is where everybody who applied for FEMA money after New Orleans were found. And so our sample is similar in terms of the kinds of dispersion to the national dispersion. So when people come back to New Orleans has changed in fundamental ways. The population has started to come back, although it still is not anywhere near where it was before. The city schools are at about 60% of their pre-Katrina enrollment, but some of those kids are different kids. That's the whole point about New Orleans, is that it's changed fundamentally in that many of the people who've come to New Orleans have come since the hurricane, and they are not the people coming back. The lower Ninth Ward, where many of our people were from, only 22% of the housing units are occupied. Average wages have increased. New Orleans is one of the places that didn't suffer the recession that the rest of the country suffered in 2008, 2009. Wages have been going up. Rents have been going up quite a lot. They abolished all public housing, so people who lived in public housing have no place to go back. And the city has become whiter and more Latino, and African Americans have been reduced in number in the city. But violent crime has still increased in the city. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan recently said that I think the best thing that happened to the education system in New Orleans was Hurricane Katrina. That education system was a disaster, and it took Hurricane Katrina to wake up the community to say, we have to do better. I think actually one of the points I want to make is that a lot of the people who are now in New Orleans and who have the low poverty rate, et cetera, are not the same people that you saw in those pictures who lived through the hurricane, because many of those people cannot afford to come back or have found better opportunities elsewhere. So a lot of the kind of good news about New Orleans is about the city, but not necessarily about the people who had lived there before the hurricane. So this is just that the rents and the cost of living has gone back up. So for the people that we found, though, where are they and what are the new neighborhoods like? And what we found, compared the census tract data on where they were before the hurricane and where they are now where we found them. And they tend to be in neighborhoods that have less poverty, that are more integrated, and that have higher education of their neighbors, and generally more jobs. So this is pre and post-Katrina for everyone, and this is the post-Katrina percentage black, percentage white in your local census tract, percentage on public assistance, all of those things. In fact, the changes in the neighborhoods of the people that we have studied over time are as great as some of the experiments that we've been doing in terms of getting people to move to lower poverty neighborhoods. So the impact in the first follow-up of Hurricane Katrina was that people ended up in slightly better neighborhoods. It's even more so if you look at people who were in flooded neighborhoods. So those are the people who were unable to come back to their post-Katrina houses, and the people who were flooded, and they're in much better neighborhoods after the hurricane. Okay, so one question is, what do the people think about these neighborhoods? Do they see them as a better neighborhood to live in or not? And there's a mixed response of the people that we talked to about what they thought. Many people reported better job opportunities, less crime in the neighborhoods they ended up in. Every person reported that the schools were better for their children, wherever they went. Even the worst schools in Baton Rouge or Houston were better for their children than the schools in New Orleans. But many people talked about diversity in their neighborhoods as being a real scary thing for them, that they had never lived around people who spoke another language, that they had never lived with people who were different than they were, and that this was a challenge for them. There was also many accounts of people feeling discriminated against because they were from New Orleans. So people told us about people not wanting to give them jobs because they thought they would not stay for a long period, they would leave again. People suspecting that criminals were moving into their neighborhood because people from New Orleans had come in, especially in Houston and Baton Rouge, where there were a lot of New Orleans people moving in. But mostly people talked about how they missed their strong ties to their families and their neighborhoods and the culture of New Orleans that they had lived in all of their lives. And many people had grown up in these neighborhoods where their sisters and brothers lived nearby and their parents, and everyone was helping together with, to take care of their children, and so they missed that very, very much. Here is a woman who's talking about how she thought that the hurricane was a very bad thing, but at the same time she felt like it provided the push that she needed to get out of New Orleans. My kids, where they're going to brand new schools, the schools are huge. They're like a college campus. They're excited about school. It's not boring. It's not ghetto like the other stuff New Orleans had. So they don't have to worry about is the bathroom clean or not. And all of that plays a major factor in me deciding to stay here because I know they're getting a good education. And they have made friends with people. The neighborhood is mixed. It's not just all black or white. My daughter has white friends, Chinese friends, and they all hang out together. They go out together. They would never have had those experiences in New Orleans. Many people describe their Texas neighborhoods as having less crime. At the same time, New Orleans is a walkable city for most people, and some people described being in Houston and being trapped because they didn't have a car. So there was a trade-off there that they were somewhat safer, but really isolation came out of it again. Many people made their decision about whether or not to return to New Orleans based on what their church did. And in fact, the people who were relocated to Houston were in some ways the best off because so many people went together, and some pastors actually moved their whole church to Houston, and that's what people decided to do. One of the saddest things that we had in the interviews were some people who were in Dallas or Houston, and their church did not move, and they couldn't find another church to go to, and many of them reported that they were just watching the TV evangelists on television and praying there rather than finding a community to go to. But this played a major role. If the pastor relocated to Houston, then people said that they were going to stay. Many people are putting down roots in Houston, and she says that she still considers New Orleans home, but I've learned that it's the past. This is something totally different, so that's not my home anymore. And another woman says, I believe when Hurricane Katrina came and we moved out, it was like God's opportunity to get us away from it and to do a new life. It's like a fresh new start, and we factored in the educational system, and it's a really good place. And then looking back at New Orleans, I still have family that lives down there, and it's just not the best place that my family needs to be right now. So this post-traumatic growth and the idea that you're in a better place comes out again and again in the in-depth interviews for people who have decided to stay. Many people talked about how they had wanted to leave New Orleans before the hurricane. They couldn't get their mother or their grandmother or their sister to move. And then when the hurricane hit, it provided that opportunity for them to go. Pull factors to go back to New Orleans, though, include this discrimination against Hurricane Katrina survivors, that people feel that they might, that their kids are being discriminated against at school, that they're missing the distinctive culture of New Orleans, and they very much missing the social support of family, friends, and neighbors.